Have you ever looked in the mirror and not recognized the woman staring back at you? I spent 15 years becoming the perfect reflection of my husband's desires. The right smile at his jokes, the right silence when he spoke, the right meal, waiting when he came home, the right body in the darkness. 15 years polishing myself into flawless glass. Until the night my daughter's fever hit 103, and he couldn't be bothered to look up from his phone. That's when I saw the first crack. A hairline fracture spreading across my reflection. And once you see the first crack, you can't unsee all the others. My name is Rebecca Winters. This is the story of how I shattered the mirror he made me into and found the woman who had been trapped inside all along. Before I tell you how I escaped, let me tell you how I disappeared. It didn't happen all at once. No woman wakes up one morning and decides to erase herself. It happens in moments so small you barely notice them. Like the day I stopped ordering my favorite dish at restaurants because he said the garlic made my breath repulsive, or when I gave away my collection of vintage concert t-shirts because he said they made me look desperate to relive my youth, or the morning I found myself standing in the closet, trying on 4 different outfits before a trip to the grocery store, terrified of choosing the wrong one, the wrong color, the wrong fit, the wrong message, the wrong reflection. Michael had standards, you see, for himself, for our home, for his wife, especially for his wife. "I just want you to be your best self," he'd say, eyes soft with concern that felt like love. "Don't you want to be your best self, Becca?" And I did. God help me, I did. So I learned to track his moods like a meteorologist tracks storms. I learned to adjust my temperature to his, my light to his shadows, my voice to his silence. I became his mirror, a perfect, polished surface that showed him only what he wanted to see. But mirrors can break, and sometimes they should. This is how mine shattered. We met in my final year of journalism school. I was 22, writing for the college paper, with dreams of investigative reporting and a half-finished novel hidden in my laptop. Michael was 28, already established at a prestigious law firm, guest lecturing in my media law class. Handsome in that polished, deliberate way that spoke of careful curation. Confident in a way that made my own ambitions seem childish by comparison. When he singled me out after class to compliment my question about shield laws, I blushed like a schoolgirl. When he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Expensive restaurants where he ordered for both of us. Weekend trips to cities I'd never visited. Introductions to people whose names I'd only seen in the business section of newspapers. He called me his diamond in the rough. Said I had potential. Said he saw greatness in me that others missed. What I didn't understand then was that his version of polishing meant grinding away everything that made me unique. It started with my wardrobe. The vintage finds and thrift store treasures I'd collected through college disappeared, replaced by clothes he selected. Classic pieces, timeless styles, nothing too bold or bright. "You have such a lovely figure," he'd say. "Why hide it under those shapeless things?" Then it was my friends, the aspiring photojournalist he called flaky, the LGBTQ activist he found aggressive, the poet whose work he deemed derivative and attention-seeking. One by one they stopped calling, or I stopped answering. It's hard to remember which came first. My career ambitions narrowed next. The investigative journalism became too dangerous. The novel a nice hobby, but not practical with our lifestyle. Instead, he suggested lifestyle blogging, something I could do from home, especially after we started a family. Something that wouldn't interfere with his networking events, his client dinners, his needs. We married 2 years after meeting. A perfect wedding, meticulously planned to reflect his taste and status. I wore the dress his mother helped select. I said the traditional vows he preferred. I smiled through photographs that would look flawless on his office wall. By our first anniversary, I was pregnant with Emma. By our third, I had a lifestyle blog with a modest following, writing sanitized posts about organic baby food and non-toxic cleaning products. By our fifth, I had forgotten the plot of my unfinished novel entirely. I became the wife he wanted, organized but never rigid, attractive but never vain, intelligent but never challenging, present but never demanding. I learned to gauge his moods the moment he walked through the door. A certain set to his shoulders meant a difficult day. Quiet support required. No domestic problems to report. A loosened tie signaled thirst for admiration. Compliments needed. Achievements acknowledged. The check of his watch while I spoke meant I was talking too much, or about the wrong things. Every marriage requires compromise, I told myself. Every relationship involves growth and change. I didn't realize I was the only one compromising, the only one changing. I didn't understand that what he called love was really ownership. Not until Emma's fever. She was 7 years old, burning up with strep throat, whimpering in pain despite the children's Tylenol. It was nearly midnight. I'd been up with her since dinner, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, monitoring her temperature, growing increasingly concerned as the numbers climbed. 102.5, 102.8, 103.1. Michael, I said from the doorway of his home office where he sat scrolling through his phone. I think we need to take Emma to the ER. Her fever's over 103 now. He didn't look up. Did you give her medicine? Yes, 2 hours ago. It's not helping. A sigh, heavy with inconvenience. She'll be fine, Becca. Kids get fevers. But strep can cause complications if you're that worried, take her yourself. Still not looking up. I have the Donovan meeting first thing tomorrow. I need to be sharp. Something inside me, something long dormant, stirred. Your daughter is sick, I said, my voice quiet but unfamiliar even to my own ears. She's scared and in pain. She needs her father. Now he looked up, eyes narrowing at my tone. What she needs is a mother who doesn't catastrophize every sniffle. You're overreacting. Again. That word, again, hit me like a physical blow. How many times had he dismissed my concerns with that same accusation? How many fears labeled irrational? How many feelings deemed excessive? I stood there, 7 years of motherhood and 15 years of marriage, suddenly crystallizing into perfect clarity. This man would never put our daughter before his comfort, would never put my needs before his convenience, had perhaps never seen either of us as fully human, just extensions of himself, reflections of his own importance. You're right, I said finally, the familiar words feeling like ashes in my mouth. I'll handle it. I drove Emma to the emergency room alone, sat under harsh fluorescent lights for 3 hours, held her hand through the throat swab, carried her sleeping body back to the car at 3 a.m., and tucked her into bed as the sun began to rise. Michael never asked how it went, never checked on her before leaving for his meeting. Simply adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror and reminded me to pick up his dry cleaning. As I watched him drive away, I caught my reflection in the entryway mirror, pale, exhausted, hollow-eyed, and I saw it, the first crack, a tiny fissure in the perfect image I'd maintained for so long. I pressed my finger to the mirror, tracing the invisible fracture. Something had broken open inside me. A door long sealed had cracked ajar, letting in a thin blade of light. And in that light, I began to see everything differently. The next weeks passed in a kind of dual reality. On the surface, nothing changed. I maintained the routines, prepared the meals, attended the functions. I was still Michael's mirror, reflecting back the perfect wife he expected. But inside, I was awakening. Memories long suppressed began to surface. Like the time he'd accidentally deleted my first blog post about postpartum depression because it was too personal and might make people uncomfortable. Or how he'd laughed when I mentioned returning to journalism once Emma started school, patting my hand like I was a child with an adorable fantasy. Or the subtle ways he isolated me, moving us to an upscale neighborhood far from my old friends, scheduling vacations that conflicted with my family's gatherings, sighing with exaggerated patience when my mother called. I began to recognize the tactics, the casual criticism disguised as concern, the jokes that left me feeling small, the rewriting of history, conflicts where my feelings became overreactions, his actions became misunderstandings. Most of all, I recognized how he'd convinced me that his reality was the only reality, that his perceptions were objective truth, that his needs were the family's needs. It had a name, what he'd been doing all these years. I just hadn't allowed myself to see it. One afternoon while Emma was at school, I opened an incognito browser window and typed, "emotional abuse signs." The search results felt like reading my own biography. That night, after Michael and Emma were asleep, I created a new email address. Using the guest Wi-Fi network from the coffee shop next door, I contacted a therapist whose profile mentioned experience with narcissistic abuse recovery. Leaving a narcissist isn't like leaving a normal relationship. You don't have a heartfelt conversation about growing apart. You don't attend couples therapy to gain closure. You don't announce your intentions and expect respect for your decision. You plan, you prepare, and then you disappear. Because a narcissist doesn't lose possessions willingly, especially their most carefully crafted reflection. My exit strategy took 8 months to implement. 8 months of meticulous preparation while maintaining the perfect facade. 8 months of being two women, the compliant wife he expected, and the determined escapee he never suspected. First, I secured our documents: birth certificates, social security cards, passports, originals for Emma and me, copies for anything in Michael's name that might affect us. I stored them in a safe deposit box at a bank he didn't use. Next, I built a financial foundation. The money I'd been skimming from our household budget went into an account under my maiden name at an online bank. I sold jewelry he'd forgotten giving me, claiming items needed cleaning or repair. I built up my blog sponsorships, negotiating direct payments rather than having brands go through our joint business account. I researched custody laws obsessively, met discreetly with a family lawyer recommended by Dr. Levine, documented every instance of Michael's emotional manipulation of Emma, the subtle undermining of her confidence, the conditional approval, the weaponized disappointment when she failed to reflect his expectations. I found an apartment in a secure building across town, paid 3 months' rent in advance, furnished it sparsely through Facebook Marketplace and Goodwill, arranging deliveries while Michael was at work and Emma at school. I prepared Emma without alarming her. Casual conversations about different types of families, books about children with 2 homes, gentle reassurances that both parents would always love her, no matter where they lived. And finally, when everything was in place, I reached out to the one person who might understand what I was about to do, my college roommate, Jessica, now a producer at a public radio station in Seattle, one of the friends I'd allowed to drift away at Michael's subtle insistence. "I need to tell my story," I explained during a burner phone call from the grocery store parking lot. "Not just for myself, but for other women who might not recognize what's happening to them." Jessica didn't ask for explanations or express shock at the years of silence. She simply said, "Tell me how I can help." The plan took shape. A podcast. Anonymous at first, using voice distortion technology for protection until the legal dust settled. A platform to reclaim my voice and perhaps reach others trapped in their own mirrors. We called it Breaking the Mirror: Surviving Narcissistic Abuse. Jessica would produce remotely. I would record on equipment she sent to my new apartment. The day I left was ordinary by design, a Tuesday in April. Michael had a client dinner. Emma had been prepared with the story that Mommy needed to finish a big project for work, so they were having a special sleepover at Grandma's house. My mother, who had flown in specifically to help, who had wept when I finally told her everything. I packed only what wouldn't be immediately noticed, left the designer clothes he'd selected, took the journals I'd kept hidden, the few photos that belonged solely to me, Emma's most treasured possessions. On the kitchen counter, I left 3 things: my wedding ring, my house key, and a letter from my attorney explaining the temporary custody arrangement and restraining order I'd filed that morning. No dramatic goodbye, no final confrontation, just the systematic dismantling of the reflection he'd created, piece by careful piece. By nightfall, Emma and I were settled in our new apartment. My mother had returned to her hotel. The security system was armed. My phone was turned off. a new one with a new number charging beside my bed. And on the desk, Jessica's recording equipment, set up and ready. The first night in our new apartment, after Emma finally fell asleep in her unfamiliar bed, I sat before the microphone. The script I'd prepared lay before me, but suddenly seemed inadequate. How do you distill 15 years of disappearing into a 10-minute introduction? How do you articulate the subtle horror of being erased by someone who claims to love you? I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and simply began to speak. Have you ever looked in the mirror and not recognized the woman staring back at you? The words flowed then, unpolished but authentic. My voice, my actual voice, not the carefully modulated tone I'd perfected for Michael, grew stronger with each sentence. I spoke about the early days, when criticism felt like care, about the gradual surrender of boundaries, opinions, desires, about the moment of awakening and the painstaking journey to freedom. When I finished recording, tears streamed down my face, not from sadness or fear, but from recognition. This voice, this strong, clear, unwavering voice, had been inside me all along, waiting to be reclaimed. The weeks that followed were both harder and easier than I'd imagined. Michael's rage when he discovered we were gone manifested in predictable ways: legal threats, financial punishment, character assassination among our social circle. But I had anticipated each move. The restraining order prevented direct contact. The financial cushion I'd built sustained us through his attempts to cut off access to our accounts. The carefully documented patterns of emotional abuse gave my attorney leverage in custody negotiations. Most importantly, I had broken the mirror. I was no longer his reflection, absorbing his emotions, anticipating his needs, affirming his reality. I was solid, separate, whole. The podcast launched a month after our departure. Jessica's production transformed my raw narrative into something powerful. Voice distortion protected my identity while preserving the emotional truth of my story. To my amazement, people listened. First hundreds, then thousands. Women who recognized their own marriages in my description. Men who realized they'd been raised by narcissists. Children, now grown, who finally had language for their confusing childhoods. Each episode explored another aspect of narcissistic abuse: the love bombing, the gaslighting, the isolation, the devaluation. I interviewed experts, shared listener stories, recommended resources. Emma adjusted to our new life with the resilience of children. In therapy, she began expressing feelings she'd learned to suppress around her father. At school, she made friends without the pressure of being the perfect Montgomery child. At home, she witnessed her mother speaking with confidence, setting boundaries, embracing imperfection. 6 months after our escape, the court granted me primary custody. Michael received supervised visitation, a restriction based not on any single dramatic incident, but on the preponderance of evidence showing subtle patterns of emotional manipulation. A year after leaving, I sat before the microphone without voice distortion for the first time. The legal battles had settled. The protective measures had served their purpose. It was time to fully reclaim my identity. My name is Rebecca Winters, I said into the microphone, and I am no longer anyone's mirror. That night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, really looked, without judgment or criticism. The woman staring back had lines around her eyes from both laughter and tears. Her hair was simpler than the carefully maintained style Michael had preferred. She looked tired, but alive. Real. I placed my palm against the cool glass, not to check for cracks, but to connect with the woman I'd become. The woman who had always been there, waiting. Hello, I whispered to my reflection. It's nice to finally meet you. If Rebecca's journey touched something in you today, you're not alone. Subscribe to our channel for stories of women reclaiming their power. Share this video with someone who might be living behind a mirror of someone else's making. Sometimes seeing another woman's escape can be the first crack in their own reflection. Comment below. What moment in Rebecca's story resonated most with you? Was it the turning point with her daughter's illness, the careful planning of her escape, or that powerful moment when she finally spoke in her true voice. For those who recognize their own relationships in Rebecca's story, we've added resources in the description below. Remember, emotional abuse leaves invisible scars, but they're no less real. You deserve to be more than someone's reflection. Breaking free starts with a single crack in the mirror. What will yours be?